All right, everyone. So we got an interesting game. Now, before the year, if you looked at this game and you said, who are the starting quarterbacks going to be, you wouldn't have thought that we had the two that we're going to have in this game. Okay. So we got the Bengals and the Vikings. Neither of them will have their starting quarterback. The Bengals certainly won't, and it looks like the Vikings won't either. Um, when I look at this game, and we're going to do what we always do, give you an argument for both sides and then give our picks, this game kind of turned for me when we looked at what was going on with the McCarthy injury, and we're going to get into why in a second. So the Bengals are +3. The total for this game is 41.5, and on the money line, the Bengals are +140. Now, I'm going to, okay, so let's start with, first off, the Vikings have not looked good. Okay, so if we're looking for an argument to bet the Bengals, the Vikings have not looked good. They played about one quarter of good football up to this point on the offensive end. And as good as the defense has been, that's not going to be enough, right? You're going to need to do more than just play good defense, especially when you're at -3, all right, and you're not the underdog. So that's a big, big boost for the Bengals. Um, you know, I think there's two things with this game too, is that we may get a really ugly game here or some type of, high scoring affair, most likely to be really ugly. And I think in both instances, I like the Bengals because we're getting +3, right? In an ugly game where if you're getting points, you're happy about that because even though 3 is a fine number, you know, if this thing ends up moving to 3.5, the Bengals, I think, become a major play. And also, I just think you have to look at this is a Bengals team that has a phenomenal receiving core and a very good running back. So when I'm looking at this game, I mean, they're gonna the Vikings defense is going to have they're gonna have their hands full with T. Higgins and Jamar Chase. Flipping over to the Vikings. Now, you might have noticed that I didn't mention the lack of McCarthy when I was talking about the Bengals. And the reason I didn't mention that, even though it is in my notes, is because the lack of McCarthy makes me like the Vikings more. And I don't want to take, any kind of jabs at McCarthy, right? I don't want to criticize him because the kid is young, he's a competitor, and he certainly is technically, I mean not technically not a rookie, but he is a rookie. But when I look at his performances so far, it's just not enough. And this was coming into the year, I was very concerned the Vikings were putting all of their eggs into the JJ McCarthy basket, and I just didn't know if he was ready. And after week one, obviously that our bet on the Bears burned us, right? Because the Vikings came out and were able to, win. But still, after seeing week two, I just can't get out of my head that I still think that it was a mistake. And so by having McCarthy out when you're bringing in Carson Wentz, who is a veteran quarterback, I think there's a chance that this team looks a little bit better. And you pair that with the elite defense of the Vikings, I think this is a recipe to kind of shock some people. Meaning, after seeing what the Bengals QB did last week, even after Burrow went down and them still getting that win, I think a lot of people are going to be very excited about the Bengals, a little bit less excited about those Vikings. I'm excited about the Vikings, right? For those two reasons. The defense remains elite, and I think they might be better in the short term. I'm not making any assumptions about how good JJ McCarthy could be a year from now, 2 years from now. I'm talking for this specific game against the Cincinnati Bengals. I think McCarthy is gives them a less of a chance to win than Carson Wentz. So now we'll get to what's my pick. I wrote in my notes because I literally didn't know what I was going to do. I have Vikings/Bengals +3, right? Meaning I don't know at this point, but I've talked myself into the Vikings, and I'm going to be rolling with the Vikings -3. I think this is one of those spots where watching these games is crucial. When you see the way McCarthy played and kind of the stuff that he was dealing with, and, part of that was his fault, part of that wasn't his fault. But when you saw how poor that was, you kind of already know we're not going to get worse quarterback play than we've gotten. If you watch that Bengals game, you know that although they ended up winning, that wasn't necessarily a perfect performance from the Bengals after Joe Burrow went down, or even when Joe Burrow has been there. And when you talk about a defense as poor as the Bengals, and the ability of can Carson Wentz come in there and make some of those big plays, I think the answer to that is entirely yes. And so I might not place this today. I kind of want to wait and see if we get that spread to get down to 2.5. But if it doesn't, I'm fine with it at 3 because I just think that, you pair that defense that the Vikings have with more of a veteran presence at QB, someone that could just do kind of the bare minimum QB play, right? Give you medium, like average. I wasn't medium, right? Average QB play. I think that's a recipe against a Bengals team that doesn't have their star quarterback and that doesn't have a very good defense. So as we always say, never gamble what you can't afford to lose. And thank you all for watching, and we will see you next.